The retirement check from the pension office arrived on the same morning my son called to tell me my granddaughter had been born. I sat at the kitchen table with both pieces of paper in front of me, the direct deposit confirmation and the text message on my phone, and I thought about how strange it is that life hands you joy and endings at the same time without asking permission. That was 14 months ago. I mention it because that morning was also the last morning I believed my family was what I thought it was. My name does not matter for this story. What matters is that I spent 38 years building a small commercial real estate business, nothing flashy, mostly warehouse properties and strip mall leases in the outer suburbs of Cincinnati. I built it from one listing in 1986 to a portfolio worth, at its peak, somewhere north of $4 million. I did it without a partner. I did it after my first wife passed from ovarian cancer when I was 41. I did it while raising my son, Daniel, mostly alone, with help from my late mother on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Daniel was my whole second chapter. When he married his wife, Renee, I was 63 years old, standing at the front of a banquet hall in a rented tuxedo that was slightly too tight in the shoulders, crying in a way I had not cried since his mother's funeral. Good crying. The kind that means something is going right. Renee was smart and careful with money and organized in a way that Daniel, bless him, had never been. She kept spreadsheets for household expenses. She sent birthday cards 3 weeks early. She had opinions about everything and she shared them clearly, without cruelty, which I had always respected. I thought she was exactly what my son needed. I brought them into the business 2 years after the wedding. Daniel had been doing corporate leasing for a property management company downtown. He knew the language, knew the contracts. Renee had her MBA and had spent 6 years in commercial finance. It made sense on paper. It made sense to me in a deeper way too, the way fathers sometimes make decisions with their hearts dressed up in logic. I wanted Daniel close. I wanted to hand something down. I gave them a combined 40% stake in the company as a wedding anniversary gift, 20% each, formalized through our attorney, a man named Gerald who had handled my affairs for 20 years and who advised me, gently, that I might want to retain majority control for a longer period. I thanked Gerald and did not take his advice. For the first year, everything worked. Revenue increased. Daniel brought in 2 new anchor tenants. Renee renegotiated 3 leases that I had let sit on autopilot for too long. I started taking Fridays off, something I had not done since 1994. I drove to the lake. I fished badly. I was happy. The first thing I noticed was small enough to explain away. Renee began scheduling meetings with our bank contact, a man named Philip, without mentioning them to me. I found out the second time because the bank sent a confirmation email to my address by mistake. When I asked Renee about it, she said Philip was an old colleague from her finance days and they were just catching up. She said it with the exact right amount of casualness, not defensive, not overly detailed. I believed her. The second thing was a document request from Gerald's office that I had not initiated. Someone had asked for the original partnership agreement, specifically the clause governing majority shareholder override in the event of owner incapacitation. I called Gerald. He said Daniel had requested it for what he described as routine review. Daniel, when I mentioned it at Sunday dinner, said he had been thinking about succession planning and wanted to understand the structure better. He looked me in the eye when he said it. I am 67 years old. I have been in rooms with people who were lying to me for 38 years of business. I know what lying looks like when it is performed carefully, and I know what it looks like when someone is genuinely explaining something. I had thought, at that Sunday dinner table, that I knew which one I was seeing. I was wrong. The third thing was not small. My accountant, a woman named Brenda, who has done my books since 2004, called me on a Wednesday afternoon in April and asked if I had authorized a signature line of credit against the Kellerman warehouse, the largest single property in the portfolio, appraised at $1.4 million. I had not. She read me the authorization paperwork. My signature was on it. I had never seen the document. I sat with that for a long time before I did anything. I did not call Daniel. I did not call Renee. I called Gerald, and then I called a forensic document examiner named Ray, who worked out of a small office in Dayton and who Gerald had used in 2 previous cases. Ray examined the signature electronically within 48 hours and called me back with a word I have not been able to unhear since: fabricated. Someone had forged my signature on a credit line authorization for $380,000. The money had already moved. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment because it matters for everything that came after. I did not feel rage. I have read stories like mine, heard them from other men my age, and rage seems to be the expected response, the overturned table, the confrontation, the scene. What I felt was closer to a door closing, something quiet and final, the way a very old house settles in winter. My son. The word kept arriving without the sentence attached to it. My son. Gerald advised me to say nothing and gather everything. I am not a naturally patient man. I have, over 67 years, learned to perform patience while my mind moves fast. I performed it for 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, Ray found 2 additional forged authorizations, smaller amounts, a combined $90,000 against 2 secondary properties. Gerald's office quietly subpoenaed Philip's internal correspondence through a civil fraud filing that we structured carefully so that Daniel and Renee would not be immediately notified. What came back from that subpoena changed the shape of everything I thought I understood. The emails between Renee and Philip went back 19 months. They were not the emails of old colleagues catching up. They were operational. They discussed the credit line strategy in detail. They discussed timing specifically, timing around what Renee referred to in one email as the transition, which appeared to mean the moment when my ownership stake would fall to a minority position through a mechanism I did not yet fully understand. Philip had connections to a private equity group out of Columbus that had been quietly circling regional commercial property portfolios for 2 years. Renee had not married into my business. She had been positioned into it. I do not know, even now, exactly when Daniel understood the full scope of what was happening. The emails suggest he knew about the credit line fraud by month 4. There is one exchange where Renee tells Philip that D is uncomfortable but aligned. I have read that sentence more times than I can count. Uncomfortable but aligned. My son. Gerald wanted to file immediately. He had enough for criminal fraud charges, enough for civil recovery, enough to move fast. I asked him to wait 2 more weeks. My granddaughter's name is Clara. She was 3 months old. I had been to see her 4 times since her birth, sitting in Daniel and Renee's living room with her in the crook of my arm, watching her sleep. Daniel would bring me coffee and sit across from me, and we would talk about nothing important, the Reds, the weather, whether the driveway needed resurfacing. I kept waiting for him to say something. He never did. The 2 weeks I asked Gerald to wait were not about the business. They were about me deciding what kind of man I was going to be in the part of my life that remained. I am not telling this story because I want sympathy. I am telling it because I think there are other men my age who have been in a version of this room, who have given something real to someone they loved, and found out the gift was being used as a tool. And I want them to know how I handled the part that came after. Here is how I handled it. I called Daniel on a Tuesday morning and asked if he and Renee could come to the office that afternoon. I told him I wanted to go over the Q1 numbers. He said, "Sure, Dad," and his voice was exactly the voice I had heard every day of his life. They arrived at 2 o'clock. Gerald was already in the conference room. Ray was on a video call, available if needed. I had a folder on the table. I did not raise my voice. I have never found that it helps. I slid the folder across the table and said, "I know about the Kellerman authorization. I know about the other 2. I know about Philip. I know about Columbus." Renee looked at the folder and then looked at Renee. She did not look at me. That told me what I needed to know about where the architecture of this had lived. Daniel said, "Dad." I said, "Not yet." I let them read the subpoenaed emails. I let them sit with the forensic report. I let the room be quiet in the way that rooms sometimes need to be quiet for the truth to take up its proper space. Then I said, "Gerald is going to walk you through 2 options. You can listen or you can leave, and we can do this in a courtroom. I would prefer you listen." They listened. Option 1, full criminal and civil filing, immediate freeze on all jointly held assets, referral to the Hamilton County DA's office on the forgery charges. Philip's involvement would be separately reported to his licensing board and employer. Option 2, full restitution of the $470,000 within 60 days, voluntary surrender of both 20% stakes back to me at no consideration, a signed non-disparagement agreement, and a cooperation statement regarding Philip and the Columbus Group. No criminal filing, provided restitution was complete. Renee asked if she could speak to her own attorney first. I said she had until Friday. She was back Thursday morning. I am not going to pretend the restitution made the money whole the cost of Gerald's work, Ray's work, 6 weeks of my attention, and something I cannot put a number on, which is the specific weight of sitting across from my son in a conference room and watching him understand what he had participated in. That cost does not have a line on a balance sheet. But the money came back. The stakes came back. Philip was referred to the Ohio Division of Financial Institutions, and his correspondence with the Columbus Group became part of a broader inquiry that I was told, 2 months later, had resulted in 3 other property owners being notified that they had been similarly targeted. Daniel called me in October. Not about the business. He called because Clara had said her first word that morning, and he wanted me to know. I listened to him tell me what the word was. It was a version of light, apparently. She had pointed at the kitchen window and said something close enough that both of them had heard it the same way. I did not say very much. I told him I was glad she was doing well. I have not seen Clara since August. I do not know if I will sit in that living room again with her in the crook of my arm. I find I cannot yet make a decision about that. I am 67 years old, and I know now that some things require more time than you think they should, and that insisting on a resolution before you are ready is just another kind of impatience dressed up as strength. What I know is this. I spent 38 years building something. It is still standing. I am still standing. There is a pier on the east side of the lake where I have been fishing badly since I started taking Fridays off. I was there last week in the early morning, with bad coffee and a thermos, and the kind of quiet that only exists when you are the only person awake for a quarter mile in any direction. I thought about the retirement check and the text message, arriving on the same morning, 14 months ago. I thought about how life hands you things without asking. I thought about Clara saying something close enough to light that 2 people who loved her heard it the same way. Then I poured the bad coffee into the lake, packed up my tackle, and drove home. Some things you keep, some things you release. Knowing the difference is the whole work.